When I started painting with watercolors, I quickly realized that consistency was a very important part of the process. Keeping aside a fixed hour every day to paint gave me accountability, and it also made me practice more and also see a massive progress and growth in my art. Hence, I decided to create this 5-day challenge for you guys as beginners to get started. The 5-day challenge is organized in such a way that every day you will receive a new tutorial to paint. At the end of the 5 days, you'll have 5 stunning watercolor floral pieces. Hi, I'm Madhu. I am a watercolorist, an educator, and the author of the book Vibrant Watercolor Birds. This is a book where we play around with watercolor birds. There are 24 different projects, each going step by step into how you can use watercolors to create beautiful results. I'm really excited to get started. Let's dive right in. Let us begin with color mixing for our day one painting. The first color that we are going to be mixing is mulberry. For mulberry, use 2 parts of red and 1 part of blue. You might have to change around the proportion a bit more to get the exact color. The next color that we'll be mixing is eggplant. Here we're switching the proportions. We're going to be doing 1 part of red and 2 parts of blue. You might have to add more blue to get a deeper eggplant color. The next color that we will be mixing is Hunter's Green. For Hunter's Green, take 2 parts of Indian yellow. You can see how this yellow has a warm shade to it. To this yellow, let us add 1 part of blue. This is a cobalt blue color. We are also going to be adding a little bit of red. Very little, just a dab of it. And this is going to give our green a much more vintage look. It's going to be more muddy, and that's the color that we are going for. Now, once you mix the red, you might notice your combination becomes very dark. If that happens, just go ahead and add a little bit more of yellow. One tip is to always make sure you wash your brush before you add in and mix the color in. So always wash your brush before mixing it. This is day one. Begin with an A5 sheet. What I like to do is to draw out the center of my flowers just to have a rough idea of where I want to place them on the sheet. This gives me a basic understanding of where each element needs to go. You do not need to be really precise, but it's just an understanding. Now let's start with our mulberry color. I am doing some tiny dots. You can see how I'm holding the brush perpendicular to the paper and just doing dots around in a circle. This is going to be the center of our flower. I like doing dots because it gives it a very gentle effect, a much more playful look. Add them until you're happy with the overall look. We don't want too much, but just enough to be really seen. Now, wash your brush completely and load it up with the eggplant color. Now, I've made sure that I've used a lot of water and I'm adding thin lines of this eggplant around my circle. Now, I'm going to be using a clean brush. That means a brush that has just clear water, and I'm dragging the paint from the center of the circle, touching that purple eggplant line and forming petals. You can see how I do this very gently by pulling the paint from that center. I also make sure to not go over this area multiple times and just using thin lines to form a petal. You can do multiple petals or you can do just a few. It depends on you. Notice how I kind of create a rounded petal shape, just dragging that paint. I also try to do a couple of petals at a time and then wash my brush and then start again with clear water and pull through that paint. This is a really simple process of playing around with colors. Once you're happy with the results, add some artistic lines in some areas, just to give it a finished look. Now we're gonna allow this to dry and let's move on to our next flower. We're gonna be doing 3 flowers right next to each other. So to begin with, let's start with painting the center of these flowers. So in this case, I'm gonna be using dots and I'm going to be using eggplant for these dots. I've loaded my brush with red. Now notice how I am dragging the paint from the center and forming beautiful petal shapes. In this case, I'm giving it a more heart-shaped look, and they're heart-shaped petals. I'm adding a little bit of red through each petal, dragging through the paint from the center. You can do each flower at a time or do them all together. I like doing them all together because I can mix around the colors as they dry and allow the water to flow. You're going to understand this as you see me paint right now. So starting up with that red, notice how I drag the paint from the center and form a heart-shaped petal. I use the same brush to paint out another petal. Don't worry if you're overlapping with the previously painted flower, that's okay. Just have fun with adding each petal at a time. If you feel like the color isn't shown through as much, go ahead and add a little bit of red. If you feel like there's too much of red, just wash out your brush and use your clear brush to paint out your petal. The idea is to form each petal step by step. In this case, you can see how I'm playing around with some heart-shaped petals as well as some circular petals and pulling in that paint from the center towards the outside. Now wash your brush and let's start again with red. We're gonna be doing red spikes for the center. So notice how I'm doing thin lines and I'm adding some more flowers. What I'm doing is adding these flowers in areas that I feel are much more empty. Let's add another one at the bottom. I generally like to add flowers in sets of 3. It's just a personal choice. You can add more, but I didn't want to overwhelm this painting. I just wanted to focus everything in the center. Now I've washed out my brush and I've taken yellow in my brush. I've loaded it up with this beautiful color. Now with yellow, you need to be slightly careful because if you touch it too much to the center, you're going to have this orange color that spreads in. Or in this case, as you can see, a lot of red. So a quick tip is in case you get a lot of red or a color that you don't want, just wash your brush and dry it up. So take a dry brush and then lift up the color that you do not want. So this is a quick way for you to get rid of any unwanted paint mix. So I'm being very careful to make sure that this yellow is more away from the center or gently touching it, not as much as before. Here I'm also following the same heart-shaped petals, but the slight shift is I'm making them much more longer. Notice the length of my petals is much more compared to the red, and the slight shift of length of the petal makes it look different from what we painted before. And that's the fun part of florals. By small changes, you can completely change the output created. So I absolutely love doing that. At this point, I like to look at my painting and see where I would like to add leaves to complete the painting. You can see it's very haphazard. There is no proper circle formation. So what I'll do with my leaves is to fill up empty spaces. So using that hunter's green that we created before, that we mixed before, I'm gonna start with painting some bold leaves. What I like to do is make sure that they're pointed in 2 different directions. Adding leaves to the top of my painting. I like to make sure that it comes through a flower, so something that's attached to an element that I've already painted. That always looks very natural compared to a leaf that's just hanging in the air. We can also use leaves varying in sizes as we paint along. So in this case, at the bottom, I'm going to add a nice bold leaf. And I'm just going to add a thin stem. I'm doing all of this with my round brush of size 4. I haven't switched over brushes yet. You can see how I make sure to point the leaves in 2 different directions, and that always just gives movement to the painting. Slowly as I add the leaves, you can see how I am filling up empty spaces and bringing the painting to the center of the page. Adding a final big leaf. This is the basic. I'm gonna complete a couple of our more finer details before having a look and seeing if I need to add more leaves. So now I'm switching over to my thin detailer brush. This comes really in handy when you need to do thin lines. I love using a thin detailer brush. It just takes out the stress of getting thin lines perfectly, so you're not struggling too much. Now, using a thin detailer brush, I've taken eggplant and I'm just painting over that center flower of our first flower for it to just be vibrant and to make it really pop. I'm doing thin dots just to give it a more textured look, and then using thin lines I am gonna outline my petals. The tip here is to not outline it completely. You can see how I'm not making sure it goes all the way through. I've left gaps and I've left some spaces between, and that gives a little to the imagine. It gives the viewer basically a lot to imagine, so they fill in the spaces and it gives a lot more interest to the painting. If you take a flower and you end up outlining it completely, it looks, as always, it looks normal. The eye doesn't have much to view. But in this case, when you leave these gaps, it gives the illusion of white spaces and it just creates a very interesting look. So I love just making sure that I have spaces and gaps between my outlines and just creating that illusion. Now you can see slowly I'm painting each petal at a time. You can go ahead and add some thin lines. The thin detailer brush makes it very easy to play around with. Our final line, and you can see how this eggplant paint has just really brightened up the painting and just given it such a beautiful look. Do the same for our red flowers as well. In this case, I'm using the exact same red that we used before instead of changing around colors. So that way I can kind of make it a little bit more clear, just highlight those petals and just give it more depth. So here I am starting off with that red. I'm not going to be painting every petal, as you can see. I'm just painting the ones that are more translucent. Just giving that little bit of highlight to the petals. I'm also just making sure I add thin lines from the center outwards. Now that we're happy with this look, let's add some of that eggplant for the centers of that red flower, because in the first step, when we had added it and then added the red, that eggplant got mixed. And so just to bring out that color a little bit more, we can add it back again using our thin detailer brush. We are almost done with our painting. At this stage, I am focusing on just completing and the painting by just adding leaves at places that I feel it is needed for the painting to look more aesthetically pleasing. What I'm specifically doing is I'm adding smaller leaves with my thin detailer brush. I'm adding them very randomly around in a circle. So notice how right now when you look at the painting, it is in the form of a circle at the center of the paper. Accordingly, I'm adding leaves to complete that look. The smaller leaves gives the painting dimension and gives it a very interesting look. Proportion is one of the elements of design that I absolutely love playing with. Now, to complete the painting, let's add some splatters. I'm taking my brush with paint, making sure it's a little bit damp, and gently tapping it over my paper to create the splatter effect. Now that our painting has dried, I'm gonna use the thin detailer brush to add some berries to the piece. Using the mulberry paint that we mixed initially, and I'm adding circles for the berries. In this case, I'm not letting them touch. I'm keeping a little bit of gap between them. I love adding berries to my piece. They give that addition of color that I really enjoy. And the best part is using a thin brush, you can easily create the stems to attach, to paint. Let's do a couple of more sets of berries using that mulberry color. For the final addition to the berries, I'm adding tiny dots with the eggplant for the edge of the berries. We have successfully completed day 1 of the 5-day challenge. Check out the Instagram hashtag Femvisionary challenge to see your fellow participants and to cheer them on their journey. This is your chance to also post your painting and to see the responses and the feedback from the community. I'm so excited that you're here and I cannot wait for day 2.